You're listening to The Social Workers on WCDB Albany.
Welcome to a special pre-recorded segment of the Social Workers Radio Talk Show, where we'll be having a roundtable discussion. I'm your co-host, Alyssa Lotmore. Today we are joined by Catherine Kramer, social worker and doctoral student in the School of Social Welfare at the University at Albany, and the students from the course that she co-teaches with Dr. Hal Lawson on Interprofessional Leadership for School, Family, and Community Partnerships. The course, which is cross-listed in the School of Education and Social Welfare, brings together educators and social workers for interprofessional education and team practice. It aims to build capacity for leadership in collective action, collaboration, and partnerships in service of supporting young people. Welcome, Catherine, and can you tell us a little more about the purpose of this course?
Yes, the course was devised by my co-teacher and mentor, Dr. Lawson, who recognized many years ago that social forces of economic poverty, social isolation, and social exclusion were leaving behind entire communities of children and young people. These challenges necessitated new institutional designs and ways of working together as professionals in service of young people and their families. The social problems faced by our communities are more complex than any one agency or organization or profession can address. Dr. Lawson also recognized if professionals are expected to be able to effectively collaborate, they must be educated and trained together in ways to do so. Fortunately, I was able to join him as a co-teacher of the course this semester.
Well, I'm glad I took this course 10 years ago, so I am glad that it's still thriving as it is, but it's a valuable course. So who are the students that you have with us today?
Dr. Lawson and I have been so impressed with the amazing educators and social workers that participated in the course this semester. I know we have learned as much from them as they have learned from us, maybe even more. Joining me today are a few of the students, including Stacy Ward, who is a doctoral student in the School of Education and an elementary school principal.
Hello, I'm happy to be here.
Ashley Keegan, student in the School of Education and high school teacher.
Hi, I'm thrilled to be here as well.
Andrea Onstadt, soon to be Master of Social Work graduate and continuing her education as doctoral student in the School of Social Welfare.
Hi, Catherine and Alyssa.
And Emily Furman, former teacher, soon to be Master of Social Work graduate and therapist in a county mental health agency.
Hi, thanks for having me.
A really diverse group, which is great. Welcome, Stacy, Ashley, Andrea, and Emily, and thank you for joining us. And you bring all of your different experiences. It will bring a really valuable discussion to this, which I think is one of the points of the class.
So together, as a group, we developed a few questions we thought would facilitate our discussion and help us kind of reflect on the experience of interprofessional co-learning and education that we've had in class this semester. So I'm going to pose some questions to Stacy, Ashley, Andrea, and Emily to consider. So our first question that we're going to dig into are, what were your previous experiences with interprofessional training or education?
I'll start. So as a teacher, I obviously work with a variety of professionals, but it's all been very informal. It's been me seeking them out or them seeking me out. Nothing like this class, no mandatory training, no mandatory learning during any of my preparatory courses, my undergraduate or my graduate. Even my student teaching, there was no forced conversation or mandatory conversation with the school social worker. So I've had it, but it's been very informal, and this course has definitely showed me the value of these formal connections.
I agree. So my last year's field placement was at a school, and that was when I sort of got this first taste of school-based social work advocacy, which is really phenomenal, but can sometimes take this tone of like your client is number one and everyone else is the enemy. And so this course really sort of teaches how advocacy can take a collaborative approach, and it's not advocate versus the world, but advocate creating harmony and collaboration.
For me, it's funny to think of, was it interprofessional training or education? For me, it was like a lot of on-the-job training that happened. Just when you move from school to school or agency to agency, you start to develop these skills based on a knowledge of how lots of different systems work. So maybe some of us kind of naturally become a boundary spanner, which in this class I've put language to. And I think of this class too as like sort of a capstone course, because really what I found in the Masters of Social Work program, between talking about participatory action research or talking about organizational dynamics or talking about like micro systems and clinical work, when you start to hear this again and again in all of these different formats, it's not that classic learning curve that goes steeply up and then plateaus. It's like a spiral where you keep revisiting and building on it, and then finding myself in this course like, oh, it's all fitting together. This was the only course though for me that really was able to take the micro and the meso and the macro systems and kind of put it all together.
I think your spiral analogy is a good one. We gain often the practical experience on the job, but to have the theoretical and the definitions and the naming, and to do that alongside people from a different profession, but who are so critical to the success of raising up the children and the families that we work with has been eye-opening.
Mm-hmm.
So why do you think it is important to have spaces and opportunities where social workers and educators and possibly others from other professions learn together? What did you personally take from the experience that you've had this semester?
I'll start. So I think one of the things we put language to, as Stacy mentioned, was this concept of the wicked problem, or the problem that is so complex you don't even understand its fullness until you have to start digging in and working on it. So I think it's important to have these spaces and opportunities where social workers and educators can come together, because it brings new light to the complexity of these problems, which helps nuance their solutions in ways that you wouldn't have otherwise.
I often think like the analogy for me is like we're all standing around an elephant, and we're all like putting our hands on this one side of the elephant, and like we have our our like magnifying glasses out. We're like taking notes about like what we see and how we're dealing with this, and we can't even see the people on the other side who are also doing the same work. And so it is this, like we keep saying, this like language issue, but it's also the exposure issue, that if you're not actually like, it's like, yeah, we might all even come to the same language, but if we're not actually seeing each other and even walking around, because maybe the right side of the elephant is very different than the left side of the elephant, and we just don't even, one side's in the sun and one side's in the shade, but we're not even aware of that because we're just looking at the texture of the skin or whatever the issue is. So I think that is something that's great about so many people being together.
Parallel to my enrollment in this class, in my role as a principal, just in these 4 months we've been together, I've invited more people to the table and reached out to more organizations simply because we were talking about it. It was the forefront of my mind. I saw the power in the examples that we talked about. So it's impacted my professional work in just having more of those people around the elephant, actually at the table with elephant to the side.
For me, this has been a really humbling experience. As a teacher, in fact, we talked about some language that we use to describe the people that we work with, and I really struggled to change from student to child because I have a very positive view of students. But talking to social workers and talking about all of the people and agencies involved in the system that impact a child's life really showed me how much of a narrow view I had of the children that I was working with. And it really was eye-opening, and again, very humbling to realize that there were a lot of other agencies and professionals working to help the children and the families be successful and have positive development. And I think I have always lived on an island in my classroom, and this was really tore down those four walls and made me realize that it really is an entire system of professionals and agencies working with the lives of my once students, but now I can see them as more whole children.
Yeah. I think also it gave me sort of a sense of empathy for different professionals' perspectives on problems, from administrators to teachers to social workers in different fields. It's a class full of really, really caring individuals who are working really, really hard to solve problems, and seeing their caring from their perspective was really enriching.
So what attributes or characteristics does an impactful interprofessional leader possess or develop?
Well, as I said, I really was humbled in this experience, and so I think that humility is a really important aspect for any leader, but certainly for one that's going to deal with other professionals that maybe have other ideas of success or boundaries that they are dealing with. And so I think the ability to realize that everybody is in it together and that the common goal is positive child development was really, it humbled me as a teacher to realize that. And so I think as a leader, to be able to take advice from other people or reflect on things that you've done right or wrong, I think that's a really important leadership skill.
I think that being someone who's able, like Stacy was talking about and Andrew was talking about, like understanding that it's not just the client or in whatever way we're working, whether we're talking about schools or these types of agencies or in any business or agency, that it's not just whatever we have identified as the product, but it's the community. But I think I really liked one of the articles we read. I think it was written by Will Cox, and it was about wicked problems. And there's this story about, I think it was a man at a desk watching a cleaner at the end of the day. And the cleaner, he's watching the cleaner, and the cleaner, I'll use she because I was going to use he, but then we get confused about pronouns. So the man at the desk, he, the cleaner, she. So she's vacuuming and vacuuming this one spot on the carpet over and over, and he can see these like white fuzzies, and she just keeps vacuuming and vacuuming, and he's like, what are you doing? I have to ask, what are you doing? And she's like, oh, I mean, I've told the bosses that this vacuum isn't working to pick up the lint, and they've told me, no, the problem is I'm just not vacuuming long enough. And so for me, that's sort of like, okay, we not only have to listen to all the stakeholders, but we have to like value everyone enough that we care what their experience is being, the vacuumer or the person at the desk or whatever it is. I just think that listening and believing what people say.
Yeah. And to take that one step further, but not just listening, but being willing to adapt your agenda.
Yes.
So from your particular perspective, you'd have a sense that certain problems should be primary. But I think the characteristic of an impactful interprofessional leader is that they wouldn't be attached to one particular system's agenda, but they'd be willing to look at all of these problems and what everyone is saying and be able to be flexible enough to accommodate. Which I think brings up the importance of having sort of non-biased, non-siloed organizations, which in this class we call backbone organizations, like organizations that can bring different collaborators together in a sort of non-biased way.
And I just think, and it ties what everyone said, is that just that openness to others' ideas and thinking and agenda being changed and not having that, this is how it's going to be, and the idea of it's okay to be in the muck. That you don't know how you solve those problems, those messy, wicked problems, is that you don't know the answer. The answer is going to come from all of our good work together.
One thing that I can't help but insert into this conversation is I think we also spent a lot of time this semester talking about the emotional work that goes along with well, when you're dealing with wicked problems, when you're talking about the kind of systemic systems level changes that we're hoping to see to address some of them, that it takes emotional labor, as we called it. So I think a rich area of discussion for us this past semester has been really talking about, if you are a leader, how do you attend to, what folks are feeling as they're being asked to look at the world differently, as they're being asked to change how they might, go about doing the things that they do day in and day out. And that can be, when we're being honest, that can be a real challenge to who we are as a person. If we're used to doing things a certain way and we see our role this way, and suddenly we're seeing it a different way. So I think this group has done a great job at really going to the site of that emotional work that often accompanies this and is not often talked about. So what is one thing you learned through this experience that you think would be important for social workers, educators, or others to know as they begin to build collaboration or partnerships?
I think, sort of building off what you said about the emotional labor involved, I think something that's important to do is give other professionals the benefit of the doubt in your mind. Really, really take to heart the sense that they entered into the helping profession for a reason, and at their core they want to make the world a better place. So as you are hearing them out, keeping that strengths-based perspective on other professionals, I think, can be really helpful.
Dr. Lawson asks us to come up with one thing every class that we've learned, so it's going to be a struggle to come up with one thing total. So I'm not going to. I'm going to say 3 things, if that's all right. The first one would be the value of communication. I know that as a teacher, I often miss a lot of what's happening in the lives of my students because of a lack of communication, whether it just be because of timing or common spaces or what have you. But I know the more that I know about my students and their lives, the better able I am to teach them. And I would imagine that that is the same for social workers. The more that they know about a student's academic achievements or even just day-to-day relationships would really be valuable. So I think the value of communication is really important. I also think that self-care, which we've kind of hit on a little bit, this was the first class that I've learned the term secondary traumatic stress, and I think that naming and looking around and seeing the burnout, which I think a lot of teachers, and myself included, almost take that on as themselves, that I'm burned out because I'm working too hard or because I'm, what have you. And I think the idea of really focusing on self-care, being there for each other and making that a focus both as a leader and just as a teacher is really, really important. And finally, as I mentioned in the beginning, I've been teaching for 10 years, and this is the first time that interprofessional discussion has even come up. And I often think in setting this class how much more impactful of a teacher I would have been if I had had this kind of language and these kind of communications 10 years ago or 15 years ago when I was being trained to teach. And I think, frankly, I think it's a disservice that we don't encourage more of this collaboration when we're going for our undergraduates. And so I think having undergraduate programs for teachers that include information about social work, and for social workers that include information about educators, I think would be incredibly valuable.
I have a list of 5 things on here, which obviously we can't get to, but some of the things that everyone has mentioned so far that come to mind are, one, that hierarchical structures, which is sort of how our post-industrial culture has developed, are not conducive for collaboration, and that sort of it's not just about how do we improve our process, but to improve our process we have to actually improve our structures. So that I think was really important. Taking into account, and we've said this in different ways, but taking into account all of the different needs. If you think of it as okay, so we got the whole team together, but this one person doesn't seem to be going along with the program here, and we could work on motivating them to go along with the program, but we could also take a step back and re-engage and reconnect and reevaluate what that person's needs are, because it's really hard to motivate people if you're not meeting their needs. And the issue of diagnostic stereotyping as well. I mean, I was at a meeting yesterday where a conversation started, and then one person said, well, we can't talk about that because that's really a personality issue. And it completely shut the conversation down and all the problem solving, when, like, well, who knows? Maybe it's a leadership issue. Maybe it's a, like, communication channel issue. Maybe, like, there's some other, but, like, we can't even have the conversation if we say, like, you know, that's a nail and I have a hammer. So, like, I know what that is. And that this is a process of, we always talk about reevaluating, but that this isn't it's not a one and done sort of thing. It's like you have to be willing to invest in this you can't have one meeting. You have to have a meeting and then the next meeting and then the follow-up and the opportunity to give feedback in between so that we can keep adjusting the agenda, and that all of this means time, and that it's worth it. Like, it seems like, oh, but it takes so much more time, but what if it takes some more preloaded time to get these systems in place, but once the systems are in place, it actually takes less energy, it's less exhausting, it takes less time. So.
Yeah, and that's, sorry to interrupt you, but we read an article early called Dancing with Systems, and one of the things I think that stood out to a lot of us was that when Native Americans make plans or try to develop things, they look 7 generations into the future, and so when you're talking about the time that it might take, that is because it needs to be long-standing, and I think we think, you know, a month into the future, and so I think that time when you're thinking really long-term impact is really important.
And I was going to speak just about systems too. Everything that we've talked about is so important. One thing that sticks with me is that when we have a system, when we've named it and framed it, and we go to do that intervention, or when we're talking about that intervention collaboratively, when we make one change in the system, it's going to impact the whole system. When we have to be able to diagram that and be aware of that as we continue through this work that is longer than a month or even a year.
Yeah, and that point too sort of illuminates this phenomenon of, like, making a quick solution that has faults can have a fallout effect in every single aspect of the system, which just creates more problems. So the investment is worth it in the end, to really put that time in to come up with a good solution.
And one last thing is that one size doesn't fit all. So this type of planning is not like we can take some awesome system that worked at a school in Oakland, California, and put it in place in Hackensack, Minnesota, in a rural community. That this type of work, you have to, like, build it for your place with all of these features in mind. Because the geography matters, the social aspects matter, the actual people who are there and at this time matter.
Well, I have to say my job as a co-host was very easy today. This was really great to be able to sit back and listen to this engaging discussion, because interprofessional leadership is something we're talking today about how it's connected with school, family, and community partnerships, but it's not just social workers and educators. This can go beyond for all different professions, because how many times are we at the table with multiple individuals from different career paths and different professions, and it's that ability to be able to communicate and hear each other and see each other's perspective and where they're coming from. So this was an absolutely great discussion, and I'm hoping, I loved this class when I took it 10 years ago, and I'm hoping that more people will continue to take this class, and this classroom will be full because they see the value in this. So again, today we have sort of a roundtable discussion. We had Catherine Kramer, who is a social worker and doctoral student at the School of Social Welfare here at UAlbany, and students from the course that she co-teaches with Dr. Hal Lawson on interprofessional leadership. And those students were Stacy, Ashley, Andrea, and Emily. So thank you so much.
Thank
you.
Thank you.